Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. This project exists outside the metrics that dominate most contemporary media. No advertisements, no algorithmic hooks, no demand for attention disguised as generosity. Instead, each episode is constructed with care, digitally narrated, not for convenience but for precision, to ensure the time spent listening is earned through ethical attention and depth. The beginning of this essay is not a preamble, but a threshold. It is where the familiar desire for resolution meets the truth that life rarely offers it. We long for conclusions that will make sense of things, but what we encounter instead are movements, openings, hesitations. To stand at what looks like an ending is often to be standing at a beginning. The lines blur, the door closes, but the echo remains. In this space, the essay invites a shift, not toward answers, but toward a different kind of presence. Not a summary, but a dwelling. Each conclusion in life, in thought, in relationship, contains more than it seems. The word ending pretends to finality, but the lived experience of it often resists that claim. There's a texture in endings, something grainy and unresolved, something that persists. That persistence is not a flaw. It's not there to finish. It's the recognition that we are always in motion, always carrying, always arriving differently than we imagined. This is not a journey with a destination, but a series of crossings. Each thought, each moment, each encounter is a bridge, and every bridge implies two places, the one we leave and the one we move toward. But even that image risks too much certainty. What if the bridge is not simply passage, but pause? What if its purpose is not to get us across, but to show us what it means to be suspended? The structure of this essay follows that movement. Its rhythm is spiral, not linear. Ideas return, but not in repetition. They arrive altered, stretched by what came before. You will find yourself circling back. A phrase re-emerges, a tone shifts, an image from earlier appears again, refracted. The intention is not to confuse, but to mirror life's actual flow. We rarely move in straight lines. We advance and retreat. We leap and linger. This essay does the same. It asks for attention that is not hurried. For a listener who can stay within the question, to begin here is not to stake a claim, it is to enter, and what we enter is not argument, but atmosphere, the conditions for reflection, the silence around the thought, the shape of an unfolding. We begin, not because we know where we are going, but because the act of beginning is itself a kind of knowledge. To begin with, perception is to enter the terrain where experience discloses itself. What first appears is never the totality of what is. We see fragments. A tree seen from one angle is not the same tree seen from another. A moment observed under the weight of anticipation feels different than the same moment filtered through memory. Yet we insist upon stitching these differences into coherence. This stitching is not imposed from the outside. It is the gesture of perception itself, which does not simply register the world, but composes it. Perception is not passive reception. It is the active work of meaning-making, of assembling the now from both presence and absence. We see not only what is in front of us, but also what we expect, what we fear, what we remember. To perceive is to interpret, and to interpret is to live within completion. Meaning does not arrive fully formed. It moves toward us, partial and shifting. The horizon becomes a figure for this dynamic. It gathers fragments, joins what is visible with what remains just beyond reach. It is not a line of closure, but a zone of openness, where certainty dissolves into ambiguity. To dwell at the horizon is to inhabit a space that resists capture. The world shows itself and withholds itself. It is at once object and event, place and passage. In this rhythm of disclosure and concealment, we encounter the provisional nature of being. There is no view from nowhere. No perception without implication. We are always already entangled. Movement through space is never neutral. Our bodies carry memory, carry desire. Each step is weighted with what has come before and what might still arrive. A bridge does not simply connect. It transforms. It binds separation into relation. It makes distance meaningful. To cross is not merely to arrive elsewhere, but to become someone else in the process. A bridge holds more than geography. It holds change. What seemed like a rupture, an interruption in continuity, becomes the very condition by which continuity is possible. The break does not shatter the narrative, it gives it form. This is how the world shows itself. not as a stable set of things, but as a series of unfoldings, each shaped by the tension between absence and presence, between what appears and what escapes. We are not outside observers, we are participants in the world's appearing. Even silence has texture, shaping how words are heard when they come. To attend to this is to relinquish the fantasy of mastery. Knowing is not capture, it is receptivity. It is the willingness to be addressed, to listen, to wait, and in that waiting to find a different kind of clarity, one that does not close but opens. Continuity does not stretch forward as a steady, unbroken line. It appears instead as a sequence of crossings, each one altering the shape of what came before. A threshold is not a wall, nor is it a seamless blur. It is a space of tension, where presence and absence lean against one another, where time gathers itself and holds. In such spaces we do not simply move on, we are remade. To cross a threshold is to pass through a subtle transformation, often imperceptible in the moment, but unmistakable in retrospect. The self that emerges is never identical to the one that stood before. Continuity in this sense is not preservation but metamorphosis. We imagine continuity as the absence of breaks, but this is illusion. Continuity arises not from smoothness but from our capacity to carry something forward through rupture, a line that bends, a breath held between sentences, a voice that pauses before it speaks again. These are not failures of flow, they are its conditions. Continuity is textured. It is shaped by interruption and return. It gathers difference without collapsing it into sameness. This is not the logic of repetition. It is the logic of reconfiguration. Continuity is what allows something to remain even as it changes. Thresholds take many forms: a doorway, a silence, a decision, a glance that lingers too long. Some are architectural, others are emotional, perceptual, ethical. A threshold may be marked by the tilt of a conversation or the thickening of a responsibility. It may appear without warning, folding time back upon itself. These crossings are not ornaments, they are structural. They hold the world together not by erasing difference, but by allowing difference to become movement. And yet each threshold carries unease. To cross is to risk, to be reshaped. Continuity demands courage, not certainty. To continue is not inevitable, it is an act. A willingness to hold what could have fallen apart. Continuity is fragile, it is provisional, it exists because we choose to carry it, to stitch what was broken into a rhythm that holds. Memory plays a role here, so does imagination. Every step forward draws on both. Continuity is not a gift, it is an effort. It resists the false comfort of symmetry. It does not aim for finality. It moves instead with the ambiguity of unfolding. A threshold is not only crossed once, it echoes, it reverberates, we carry its trace, and in carrying it we are altered. This is the work of continuity, to make movement possible without erasing the weight of what has been, to let the past speak not as a limit but as a resonance, to recognise that what continues is not fixed but always in the act of becoming. Time does not preserve, it transforms. Its rhythm unsettles because it offers no place to stop, no point at which one can say with finality, now it is done. Each moment leans into the next, not as replacement but as alteration. And yet within this continual passing there is more than loss. There is a pattern of recurrence, not the return of the same, but the return of the altered. In this way, endings are not closures, they are textures of transition. What ends folds into what begins, not as cause into effect, but as presence into possibility. The day that ends already carries the shape of what follows. Dusk and dawn are not opposites, they are mirrors. One descends, the other ascends. But both hold the same tension, the recognition that time moves through difference, not despite it. Continuity arises from this movement, not from the illusion of permanence. To be continuous is not to be the same. It is to remain within the current of becoming. This current does not restore what was lost, it reconfigures it. Each new beginning carries the residue of what ended, but it also carries a promise, not to repeat, but to unfold. This unfolding is not gentle, it demands relinquishment. The self must let go of what it was to become what it is not yet. This letting go is not a heroic act. It is often quiet, uncertain, and slow, but it is real. It happens in the silence that follows a farewell, in the ache of absence, in the pause before the next sentence. What feels like stillness is often preparation. Beneath the surface, the current moves. Time is not idle. Even in rest, it reshapes. We long for resolution, for a moment when the contradictions smooth themselves out, when what was broken is made whole. But time denies this, not because it is cruel, but because it is alive. Its truth is not completion, but continuation. A narrative that folds and stretches, that loops back even as it moves forward. To insist on a final word is to miss the depth of what is still unfolding. Meaning is not sealed, it is disclosed, then redrawn. To live with time is to live within this refusal. What emerges then is not despair, it is attention. If nothing is final, then everything matters. Each gesture becomes a thread in the fabric of what continues. Continuity is not a given, it is a calling. A way of being present to the moment, not as conclusion, but as opening. Not as repetition, but as rhythm. To live is to step into this rhythm, to let go without abandoning, to move without escaping, to become without erasing. Continuity often arrives disguised. It wears the clothing of smoothness, of one thing folding gently into another, as if time's passage was seamless, as if change came without interruption. But thresholds teach otherwise. They do not mask the shift, they reveal it. A door is not invisible. A bridge does not pretend there is no gap. These structures mark difference. They hold it visibly, even audibly. The click of a latch, the creak of wood, the pause before crossing. Continuity does not erase such moments, it composes them. To cross a threshold is to feel the nearness of what was and the strangeness of what now is. The shift is subtle, a new light, a different tone of air, a change in how the body moves. Yet these subtleties hold weight. They tell us that every continuation contains decision, not necessarily dramatic or fully conscious, but real. The step is taken, and with it something alters. The change may be small, a glance turned, a word hesitated, a breath drawn in the pause. But from such details, life accrues shape. This is the paradox of the threshold. It marks discontinuity and sustains continuity, not by smoothing over difference, but by shaping how it is held. The line between past and future is not erased, it is folded. In the act of crossing, we carry what was into what is becoming. The bridge binds not by collapsing distance, but by sustaining it in relation. Continuity, then, is a movement that includes its own ruptures, a form that honours the breaks while composing through them. To walk through such moments is to feel suspended, not lost, but stretched. One foot still in the familiar, the other already reaching. This suspension is not weakness, it is awareness. It makes visible the edge of transformation, that something new is beginning, not because the old has vanished, but because it now speaks differently. Continuity requires this openness. It asks us not to repeat, but to listen, to let the past echo into the present without fixing its meaning. Within this rhythm, continuity becomes a practice, not of holding on, but of attending, to the way meaning unfolds, to the way relation shifts, to the way presence deepens. Continuity is not the denial of change, it is the form through which change becomes inhabitable. A way to live amid shifting horizons without losing direction. To remain, not by resisting movement, but by moving with it. Each step not toward finality, but into further resonance. Still, what we call an ending is rarely the fixed point it pretends to be. It is more like a pause in music, a held note that lingers after its sound has passed, vibrating in silence. The surface may appear to close, but something underneath hums on, carrying forward what seemed concluded. This is not termination, but transition. A shifting of weight from one form to another, like a bridge that extends just beyond what was thought to be its end, revealing more path, more sky, more motion. In that extension lies possibility. What follows does not overwrite what came before. It refracts it. The shape of continuity bends through the prism of change. The past is not replaced but re-entered differently. The repetition is not mere return. It is transformation. To inhabit this unfolding is to resist the hunger for certainty, the desire for conclusions that settle all accounts. Closure promises safety, but too often it silences the murmurs that still rise from beneath. Instead, what is called for is a different attention, one that can hear the quiet insistence of what has not ended, one that can read the lines not only for what they say, but for what they withhold. The gesture of conclusion then becomes a form of listening. It pauses not to declare completion, but to make space for what continues to speak. The threshold here is not an edge, but a porous membrane. a boundary that breathes. To dwell at such a point is to stand within the rhythm of suspension, the not quite after and not quite before. It is a space of tension, yes, but also of care for what came and what comes. In this attention lies responsibility, to recognise that endings do not absolve us. They beckon us. They ask not for final judgment, but for continued presence. The willingness to remain in relation even as form shifts. The past does not recede cleanly. It leans forward. Its traces are not left behind, but woven into the present's fabric. Likewise, the future is not a blank space. It presses into the now with the weight of anticipation. Between these, the present becomes thick, charged with echoes and openings. Each conclusion is thus layered, not a neat wrapping, but a folding that gathers both what has been and what might still be. To live within such awareness is not to be trapped in incompletion, but to be animated by it. Not to despair in the face of unfinishedness, but to respond with humility, with openness, with the sense that what has ended still breathes, that what has passed still stirs, and that what comes next is not replacement, but resonance. Time is often treated as a line, a clean sequence stretching from past to present to future, but lived time never conforms to that clarity. It folds and frays, bends back on itself, stretches forward, then gathers again in a moment. It dilates in memory, compresses in anticipation, and rarely unfolds in straight progression. The present is not a point, but a layered field, thick with what was and trembling with what might be. To live within time is not to follow a track, but to move within a weave, threads of past and future continually knotting into now. This view displaces the comfort of closure. No ending is ever just an end. Every moment that concludes carries forward remnants of what preceded it and the form of what might still unfold. The past does not sit inert, a closed book on a distant shelf. It acts within us, through memory, habit, longing. It colours the way we speak, shapes what we avoid, informs what we hope. To remember is not to retrieve a stable image, but to re-enter an experience with new eyes. In doing so, we do not return to the same, but open new meanings from what seemed familiar. The past, then, is not behind us. It lives inside us. It walks beside us. The future, too, is not some distant realm waiting for its cue. It leans forward into the present, exerting pressure. In the form of plans, fears, desires, the future pulls us forward before it arrives, and yet it never arrives fully. Its arrival is always partial, always inflected. What we expect rarely matches what appears, and in that mismatch is the space for transformation. The future is not a certainty to be predicted, but a space of emergence. Between these forces the present thickens. It is a site of negotiation, a place where memory and anticipation clash and braid together. No single moment is self-contained. Each carries the weight of what has been and the lean of what may be. To live in the present, then, is not to be isolated in a now, but to dwell in a shimmering field of echoes and possibilities. It is to bear the intimacy of time's fold. This temporal complexity is what gives experience its depth. Without memory, we would have no story. Without anticipation, no direction. But without this layered present, there would be no meaning. The now is never empty. It pulses with unfinished threads, some trailing backward, others just beginning to stretch forward. To live attentively is to feel this weaving and respond, not by simplifying, but by remaining open to its patterning. Suspension is not stillness. It is not the cessation of movement, but the thickened pause in which possibility gathers. To step onto a bridge is to feel this suspension in its most intimate form. One has left something behind, but not yet arrived elsewhere. Beneath the feet, the ground does not give way, yet it is not the ground we knew. The bridge holds us between, and in that between lies a particular intensity, a charge of becoming that resists the comfort of completion. To inhabit a threshold like this is to live within tension. The past has not released us, but the future has not yet revealed itself. In this in-between space, our choices acquire depth. They are not merely actions, but responses to the unformed. And yet this suspension is not a void. It is filled with memory, with hope, with the unspoken knowledge that no crossing leaves us unchanged. Even hesitation becomes meaningful. The pause before stepping forward, the glance back before moving on. These are gestures that recognize the weight of the crossing. Suspension is also relational. The bridge is rarely crossed alone. Others have passed this way. Their steps have shaped the structure, their departures and arrivals woven into the planks beneath us. The trembling we feel is not merely our own, it is shared. And in this recognition lies a quiet solidarity, the sense that even in solitude, we are not alone in the act of transition. Mortality deepens this awareness. The river below reminds us that time flows regardless of our readiness. Every step forward marks a loss as well as a gain. The world we return to, even if familiar, will have shifted. We too will have changed. This does not diminish the value of crossing. It heightens it. The bridge becomes not a detour, but a crucible, a place where the self is stretched, refined, momentarily unmoored in order to become more fully situated. To resist this suspension, to demand immediate resolution, is to miss the gift of the in-between. It is here, in the charged space between certainty and surprise, that new orientations emerge. Here, creativity is born not from stability, but from the encounter with the unknown. Suspension, then, is not delay. It is the generative pause in which freedom reveals itself. It is the lived experience of being shaped by what is not yet visible, yet deeply felt. To remain open within it, to linger, to listen, to feel the hum of possibility, is to allow life to articulate itself more fully, not as certainty, but as a movement that gathers meaning as it unfolds. To act ethically in times of shifting ground is to resist the pull of certainty. It is to recognize that truth as it arrives is never untouched by perspective. When the frames through which we see the world begin to blur or collapse, the temptation is to cling to the last structure that offered clarity. But this impulse, though understandable, can close down the very spaces in which ethical life becomes possible. Ethics, in such moments, does not begin with answers. It begins with attentiveness. To be attentive is to notice the limits of one's own perception, to ask not just what we believe, but why and what those beliefs allow us to see or obscure. Frames are not neutral. They are shaped by histories, by habits, by power. They determine which questions are thinkable and which are not. And when those frames shift, it is not only our understanding that trembles, but our responsibility. What we once took for granted becomes a choice. What once felt secure reveals itself as constructed. In this space, ethics becomes an act of orientation, not a fixed system, but a practice of tuning oneself toward openness. The question is not only what is right, but what makes room for more life, more voices, more futures. This is not an argument for relativism, but for humility, a stance that holds convictions with care, knowing they might need to be revised in light of new perspectives. Ethical action here is less about certainty and more about responsiveness. It asks us to remain porous, to let the world enter in ways we did not anticipate. Such responsiveness carries risk. To remain open is to be vulnerable, to risk the discomfort of change, but it is also what allows transformation. Ethics that cannot change is not stable, it is brittle, and when it breaks violently. The more resilient path is the one that bends, that listens, that adjusts without losing the thread of care. Our ethical choices ripple outward. They shape not only the present, but the kinds of futures that become possible. Each decision becomes a signal, a gesture that others might read and respond to. In this way, we are never only acting for ourselves, we are participating in the formation of shared reality. The bridge once again appears, not as a solitary crossing, but as a collective structure built by countless acts of attention. Ethics, finally, is not the defense of what has always been, but the careful imagining of what could be. It is the courage to dwell within uncertainty without surrendering the capacity to act. And in doing so, it becomes less about conclusion and more about invitation, to remain engaged, to remain open, to walk forward with care. The ending of anything often pretends to be final, but rarely is. What appears to close may only pause, like a note in music that trails into silence without vanishing. Beneath the surface, a hum persists. The last moment does not erase what came before, nor does it seal what follows. Instead, it shifts the rhythm, adjusts the weight, and opens space for what remains to unfold. Standing at such a point is less about resolution than about resonance. The aftersound that lingers, shaping how we continue. To dwell in an ending is to listen for what it still carries. Gestures, voices, fragments of thought. None disappear entirely. They remain in the folds, in the quiet, in the textures that form the present. Even as the surface smooths over, depth remains. What concludes does not fall away but turns, offering itself again from another angle. This return is not repetition, it is variation. What seemed known becomes strange again, lit by the memory of its own passing. Time, in such moments, does not move forward in a line. It loops, spirals, leans. What ends also echoes, threading itself into the next rhythm. The current does not break but bends. Even stillness is not empty. It is charged with anticipation, a readiness for what might stir. What lies ahead is not separated from what lies behind, but layered within it. The crossing continues, not because it must, but because it can. To look back is not to retreat. It is to notice what remains present. The past is not left behind but carried, reshaped by each new step. The future is not untouched by history but thick with its possibilities. Between them, the present opens, not as a fixed point but as a space of suspension, alive with the tension of movement and memory. In this suspension, the bridge holds, not as a structure of stone or steel, but as a gesture, a way of reaching across without erasing the gap. It invites without enclosing. It connects without collapsing. To walk it is to participate in something provisional and ongoing. The horizon, too, never arrives. It only shifts, inviting the gaze further, asking for another step. Silence gathers here, not as absence, but as invitation, a space for thought to continue beyond the words. What comes next does not replace what came before. It carries it forward, refracted and alive. And so, the path does not end, it opens, not with finality, but with the quiet suggestion that something still waits just beyond the next breath.